So let's recall there are two rows of the carpal bones, the proximal one and the distal one. Each of these bones are extremely unique in shape with respect to the placement in the palm. We are going to look at these individually and explore the features which make them stand out. Remember, I've told you they resemble like the real-life objects? So firstly, let's look at the proximal row of the bones. Now we will initially talk about the scaphoid bone in detail. So it is a long boat-shaped bone that is derived from the Greek word scaphe, meaning boat. And it is like a skiff, or you can say a twisted peanut, that lies beneath the anatomical snuff box. It is one of the largest bone in the proximal line of the carpal bones. The scaphoid is most frequently broken and the injury mostly occurs due to the fall on the outstretched hand. The scaphoid articulates proximally with the radius to form the radial border of the carpal tunnel. Here you can see both back and front side of the scaphoid bone. If you look at the palmar side, it is covered by the radius bone. The trapezium bone is present on the distolateral side, the trapezoid bone on the dorsomedial side. Superomedially, it is attached with the lunate bone, and inferiormedially with the capitate bone. On the superior side of the scaphoid bone, we can find a tubercle as well. The blood vessels supplying the carpal bones have entered the wrist from the lateral side and from the roughened surface of the scaphoid bone. You can easily locate the lunate bone because it is present midway in the carpal bones between the scaphoid and the triquetrum. It is derived from a Latin word luna, meaning moon. Because it is a crescent or moon-shaped bone, the moon is facing downwards, where it articulates with the head of radius, which is known as the carpal articular surface. Superolaterally, the scaphoid bone is present on medial side. And if you look at the inferior-medial view, the capitate bone is present on the superior side, the triquetral bone on the lateral side, and in the end, hamate bone is present inferior-medially. The lunate bone is the most frequently dislocated bone among the carpal bones. The third bone in the proximal row is the triquetrum. It is a three-cornered bone named as triquetral bone. It is pyramidal in shape and it is named so because tri means three and quetta means corner. From a palmar view, its apex points distomedially towards the pisiform bone. The base of triquetral bone is directed laterally and communicates with the lunate bone. It rests upon the hamate bone, which is located in the distal row of the carpus. Now the location of this bone is between the lunate and the pisiform bone on the medial side. Fractures of the triquetrum often happen upon the forceful dorsiflexion of the hand with an end goal of evergent fracture. This was the detailed story of the triquetral bone. Now we will move towards the pisiform bone. The last or the fourth bone of the proximal row is pisiform bone, which is P-shaped and derived from the Latin word pisiformis, meaning P-shape. In the proximal row of the carpal bone, it is present most medially. It is likewise the littlest of the apparent multitude of carpal bones and named as sesamoid bone. Its dorsal surface is faceted and is articulated with the ventral surface of the triquetral bone and extends anteriorly to form the bump that can be felt at the medial base of the hand. In contrast to the other carpal bones, the pisiform bone is not involved in performing any movements of the wrist. Up till now, we have discussed all the bones of the proximal row in detail, which are the scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. Now, we will jump into the distal row and see how many bones we have and possibly try to learn every detail about them. Let's move ahead. When the hand is viewed from the palmar surface, the first and the most lateral bone in the distal line is trapezium. You can recall it from the word table, which is actually derived from the Greek word meaning trapezion, or we can say it multangular bone. The trapezium bone is circumscribed by trapezoid bone medially and by the scaphoid bone superiorly. Inferolaterally, its primary articulation is with the principal metacarpal bone. Inferomedially, it at times likewise articulates with the subsequent second metacarpal bone. A noticeable tubercle is present on the palmar aspect of the bone. In the event that you can take a gander at its medial side, a groove is present for the ligament of the flexor carpi radialis. The next bone after trapezium is the trapezoid bone. It is cheese-shaped and resembles trapezium. It gets its name due to the similarity to the trapezium bone as explained previously. It is the littlest bone which can be found in the distal row of the carpal bones. The trapezoid is the least commonly fractured carpal bone. If you look at it from the palmar aspect, however, it is much wider on its dorsal side. It articulates with 4 bones. Its proximal facet articulates with the scaphoid bone. Laterally we have trapezium bone. On the medial side there is the capitate bone, and distally we have the second metacarpal bone. Now here a question arises. How can you remember which is more lateral between the trapezium and trapezoid? As you all know that this is the medial side and this is the lateral side. So you can remember it in such a way, spell trapezium. So in the end we have which is related to thumb. So you can remember it this way. And if we spell trapezoid, OIT is trapezoid, it is by the side. So the trapezium is thumb and trapezoid by the side. Now coming towards the largest carpal bone, which is head-shaped and is the largest bone in both the proximal and the distal lines. The huge bone in the distal row is the capitate bone. Its name is derived from the Latin word head and is actually like a head shape. Now if we look at its articulation, so it joins with 5 following bones. It is encircled by the lunate bone in the proximal position, the third metacarpal bone found distally, the trapezoid bone present laterally, and the hamate bone on the medial side. In the end, capitate articulates at the upper medial aspect with the fourth metacarpal bone. So the last bone in the distal row is hamate. It is a Latin word meaning like a hook. It is wedge-shaped bone which articulates with 5 carpal bones. The hamate bone is surrounded by lunate bone in the proximal lateral direction and by triquetral bone in the proximal medial direction. Now if we move laterally, it is going to articulate with the capitate bone, and moving distally, it articulates with both 4th and 5th metacarpal bones. We can easily distinguish the hamate bone due to its shape and hook-like process which stretches out towards the palmar surface. When a golfer hits the surface hard with a golf club on the downswing, it could be a cause of fracture to the bone. It is prominently visible subcutaneously due to the presence of hamlus, which is a bony notch on its palmar aspect and bends along the side. It exists with the help of the flexor digiti minimi brevis and the pisohamate ligament. So this slide is the summary of all 8 carpal bones that we have studied and their resemblance with the real-life object, so you can memorize them easily. So that's all about the carpal bones. I hope you have understood all the details. Stick with us to learn more.